Mhm. Yeah, it's on my end. It's good.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you for your patience. Good morning. We're so happy to have you all here. Well, today we are doing our third annual symposium, also called Language Works Conference, and we're so excited that you're all here today. And today we're going to be talking about translation, interpreting, and the platform economy. So what is the impact that these fields have with the new digital platform economy, digitalization, and all of that? And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Julie. My name is Daniela, by the way. I am a student leader here. And so I'll introduce Julie, who is the director of the Monty program. Thank you so much.
Good morning, welcome. So glad to see you all here, and also many of you familiar faces. Some of you kind of vaguely familiar, and forgive me if I come and introduce yourself, because I think some of you I've met on Zoom, but not in person. So yes, I'm very, very, very pleased to have you all here. If you would let me go into. This is the age of the platform economy, as we say. I need my reference here. Sorry about this. Oops. Where were we now? Oh dear. All right. I will wing it. I will speak from my heart, since I can't find the script to introduce Dr. Sebastian Mas. Well, so yes, I think he, like the rest of us, we probably have all just made our last order on some platform or other. Maybe last night we went on Grab, to get our dinner. In any case, this conference really is about how we are all hooked on to the platform economy, and yet at the same time we find ourselves also having to carry on and translate and interpret. And a lot of it is in real time, face-to-face interactions. And how did that all change our perception of communication, our perception of what being faithful to meaning means, and what production of meaning means, right? And how actually we see language, the very nature of translation and the very nature of meaning making changing. So without much ado, I will welcome Dr. Sebastian Mas to give us a perspective from his research with the prison system in the UK. Dr. Sebastian is a lecturer in business and business communication and linguistics with Lancaster University. And prior to that, he has worked in various capacities. More specifically, what marks him as really broadly a true cosmopolitan European linguist is he has worked at the Center for Multilingualism at Freiburg, Switzerland, and he's also taught in Germany and in the UK and at, I think, Moldova, and and actually here in the United States. Very much affiliated with University of Pennsylvania. So, and here we are. And the last thing I wanted to say also is that last but not least, really, he is, if anyone is, he is pretty much the best mentor and teacher that one could ever imagine having. And I know that from personal experience, since he's my advisor, my PhD advisor for the last, he's been for the last 4 years or so. So let's welcome Sebastian Moss.
So should we kind of, hi. Thank you so much, Julie. Can you hear me well, guys? Okay. Thank you so much. This was kind of, yeah, over the top. So thank you so much, Julie, for setting this up. This is really an interesting program, and I'm so happy to actually been invited by you, and I'm very humble by this. And I'm also really looking forward, because this we often don't have in kind of in hyper academic settings, that actually we have perspectives from people who actually do the language work behind it. So while we theorize around it and maybe do some research, like having a venue and being able to actually share or like learn about your own experiences in the platform economy is, I think, super interesting. Okay, I think we don't have so much time, so I will maybe cut right to it. At the end of the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. I have also my email address there, or you can ask Julie about that if you have any kind of further questions or want to have kind of advice on literature you're interested in that connects to this. Just feel free to get in touch. Okay, so this is work in progress. Actually, I'm doing this together with two scholars, one from the US, Aneta Pavlenko, and who's based in Oslo at the moment, and Alfonso Del Perche, who's based at UCL, University College London. And it's kind of a collaborative project where I'm the PI, and we're looking at kind of how linguistic resources, or largely how multilingualism is managed in the United Kingdom, or specifically in the English and Welsh prison system. So to give you a bit of an overview, it's fairly different from the US, as I understand it. So most prisons are run by something that's kind of funnily called His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, plus a couple of others are outsourced to industrial conglomerates and run privately on a for-profit basis. And when we look at last year, and this is about the time when we started our project, there were about 10,000 prisoners in the UK who identified as foreign nationals. It doesn't say much yet about how well they actually are able to speak English, but it already, we later come to this, maybe there is an indication when you look at the different nationalities. The largest groups of those people are Albanian, Romanian, Polish, Lithuanian, and Pakistani. So you see there's already kind of a certain also amount of rather exotic languages around. And there is always kind of has been in the past, and even now, even more so, a problem with supply and demand, especially with regard to less predictable languages like Albanian. There has been recently a surge in Albanians in prison. So again, there is no insights on the level of proficiency in English. There is also, interestingly, no legal obligation to accommodate speakers in other languages at prisons in England and Wales, apart from Welsh, which is a minority language and has a protected status. But apart from that, not. And there's also no specific policy in place to manage linguistic diversity beyond kind of initiatives that individual prisons pull up, where they maybe train other inmates to become interpreters, for instance. The only exception there is that prisons can use or offer to use remote interpreting and translation services contracted by the court system and the Crown Prosecution Service. So basically they can kind of ride along, they get kind of the access details. There is always someone in prison who has a training in accessing those things. And it's basically the platform economy, and it is run by the Big Word at present. I don't know, you might be familiar with this kind of company. So, and they in migration politics, and until recently also, and this played a role to COVID. So it messed up the formatting. So what research to date has shown in a way, and that's why we thought, okay, this is maybe something interesting to pick up on from the UK context, that there are also the difficulties in language access, like accessing kind of healthcare, telling a doctor at prison, like, what's your problem? Accessing appeals procedures, legal help, your day-to-day communication, whatever administrative procedures, rules, and not understanding those leads to higher suicide rates, to mental health problems among prisoners, and also security problems. There is often what has been observed in other contexts. The problems are you can't express yourself, there is social isolation involved, you're not aware of your own rights, you can't participate in any training initiatives, you're discriminated because of the language, and there are prejudices and increased sense of anxiety that you suffer. There is, and this was something that got confirmed kind of before we started the research, and I will tell a bit about the methodology in a second. There isn't hardly any form or documentation sent out, for instance, to prisoners in a language other than English. Even high stakes documents like kind of your asylum decision and kind of information how to appeal decisions is not provided in any language apart from English. And there was also no concerted effort to address those issues beyond kind of what is available in the form of remote interpreting and translation services provided by the Big Word. And we were interested now basically to in this kind of project, we were interested in, okay, how first of all, how is it managed? How is multilingualism managed? What initiatives are in place locally to support people with no or with little English in individual prisons? How does it work, and who provides those services? And what are also best and worst practice scenarios? And specifically then also, how does staff view what is available to them? So how do they view the platform economy, basically, that kind of is the only external help they got? So, and the project is, as I said, it's ongoing. So, and it has a quantitative element to it that is done now, and has a qualitative element to it that is kind of starting basically right now, or has started and is ongoing until the summer. So the quantitative part was a survey that we sent out. So as a first step, we needed to, especially in such a more sensitive research environment, you need to first find stakeholders that kind of within the institution that somehow support your research and also act as gatekeepers. And we had something called foreign national offenders kind of operational services. So basically those people in charge of administering foreigners in prisons. And then on the other hand, language diversity or diversity and inclusion, which was largely concerned or is largely concerned with prison workers, but also recently kind of also thought about kind of including prisoners in their kind of scope. And then we kind of designed a survey to get a better understanding of what is provided and what isn't. So pretty basic approach, actually. So we devised a survey on Qualtrics together with our stakeholders, and not yet together with our stakeholders, but we kind of you need to sometimes know the particularities of what is potentially available to kind of ask precise questions. They kind of distributed the survey on our behalf with our request that someone in prison who is the most qualified one to actually answer or address those questions around multilingualism and how it's managed, and if they're satisfied with the services or not. But we got back a bit over 20 responses, kind of substantial responses, which is it's not much, but it gave us a good idea for then a follow-up research that we are doing now. So we identified a couple of places that were interesting based on the survey responses, and what we do now is we do an ethnographic observation of how actually language work is done. So what happens in a moment of crisis, for instance, when someone needs language help, Or we for instance do interviews with staff and ask them about their views about big word or about kind of generally how to best assess the language needs of a prisoner. And then ultimately what you come up with, but this is of course tricky, is to develop recommendations for better practice. In the end, what you also learn while working in those scenarios that are also to some extent in the UK quite politicized is it's not necessarily it's not necessarily the most desirable thing or the potential best outcome that you could describe based on your data is not necessarily the thing that is politically desired. So as a prisoner in the UK, and of course also here and in most places, I guess, and then especially as a prisoner who's not even a national, you're quite low in the pecking order, and you're more kind of a political instrument to rally against than someone who's regarded as having rights. And even more so for foreign national prisoners in the UK, as most of them, around 95%, have to leave after their time in prison in the UK, so they're deported. So just briefly about the analytical design. So we had kind of a large amount of survey responses, and we subjected them to two types of analysis. So first, you have the more the closed questions where you do descriptive statistical analysis, pretty simple to identify most frequent types of responses. So it sounds more like more sophisticated than it actually is. So, and then B, for the open questions, you have content analysis, and then you kind of reduce the pool of diverse responses, and then you come up with key issues around the challenges relating to language, the policies that exist, and also the strategies people come up with and how they view those strategies. Super briefly, just generally in our prisons, language needs were rather predictable in UK context, Romanian, Polish, for instance, where Albanian was a bit problematic, but especially the other first 4 or 5 languages are quite predictable in a sense, and you might assume that in the platform economy also might come up with a lot of kind of potential interpreters. If you look at what prisons actually do, we found that theoretically, almost every prison we contacted offers telephone interpreting services, hypothetically. We then found out actually in the kind of qualitative responses that they don't do that so much. It's just kind of something that is offered, but it doesn't mean that's actually taken up to a large extent. And practically most interpreting seems to work around fellow prisoners, which of course has security implications also and other kind of things to remember, and then staff members, which also has a problem or has implications regarding privacy and so on. Anyway, there were a couple of concerning issues. This is just one, for instance, that actually most prisons don't give you access to independent legal services in languages other than English, which is a kind of a rather kind of troubling thing, and especially more so as even prisons where they're clearly specialized, so to say, on foreign nationals, they don't have anything in place, like kind of where you could, when you get a letter, for instance, from the Home Office, which is kind of the department that sends out kind of your deportation notice. There is often no way for prisoners to actually kind of get a grip of what's written there, and then also not a good kind of or your chances are not really large to kind of appeal this, or you need language skills to actually appeal this, to understand what is said to you, and then also to appeal. So in the more kind of open-ended responses, people told us, okay, there are no concerted efforts in place. We kind of knew that already, but it's still good to kind of confirm those things empirically. There were no approaches to measure language proficiency of incoming prisoners. So initially you have no clue. There's no database that says, okay, person A can't do English well. So like always, when you communicate with him or her, then there needs to be language help in some form. There was, and this is now interesting, kind of a profound dissatisfaction with the outsourced language service provider. specifically here by the big word. This changes every 3 years. So this is a large tender by the Ministry of Justice. And basically for the Crown Prosecution Service and the courts, but there always kind of is an added element of prisons that can also rely on this. So, and what people were telling us already before, or our stakeholders were already telling us kind of when we did a couple of interviews with them beforehand to understand, to contextualize the whole research side, is that there is often an issue of trust with regard to remote interpreters. We don't know them well. They're just there somewhere on the phone or on a screen. I have no clue who they are or where they actually are. And the same goes for translated documents. So yeah, we don't know where the interpreters actually are. And for them, it's often seen as a security issue, interestingly, for prisons. Okay, and then I'll just give you some of the data here from the kind of open responses, and to get an idea also how in the UK this generally works and what people think about it. And it was interesting that prison staff to some extent is aware of the problems that go along with not accommodating someone in their language. So one says, for instance, so she finds it incredible that the Home Office still give official documents regarding immigration decisions and prison detention letters in English and not the language of the individual. And here it's becoming also an issue because this causes a huge amount of issues with regard to sourcing interpreters on the one hand, and also has a profound effect with regards to the levels of suicide and self-harm within the FNO population. So it is really an issue that needs to be addressed in some way, and even staff recognizes this. And then staff need time and resources to conduct processes with translation services. So it's a process to contact the big word. You need passwords. You need to kind of book an appointment on a platform that is not so easy to actually access from within the prison. So access is very clunky. Translation can be time-consuming, exclusionary for the staff members. And the staff members, and this is again this issue of trust, and that seems to play a role here when it comes to the translator. People are often unsure what's being said, and if it's being accurately translated or understood. So it's both quality and then also at the same time, who is this person? So not knowing exactly who is interpreting, not being able to see the person kind of in the room, but instead just seeing her on the screen. And then also with regard to quality, people reported a steady decline in the quality of interpreting services itself, especially on face-to-face interpreters being booked and then not showing up when they were kind of requested to go to the prison. Availability, especially with languages that are not so predictable, like Albanian, not reliable, and so on and so forth. So and more fundamental critique. So basically, what then now we're at this kind of second stage of the research, where we then through kind of more ethnographic methods try to find out, okay, what is really going on. So now we have a kind of a first picture of the problem basically, and now we would really kind of and I think we're quite excited about this to go to prison and then just observe how interpreting actually happens, how do power dynamics play out, what do people say after kind of a specific conversation, what do staff say about the interpreter, and so on and so forth. So this would be kind of the next step, and I think we don't have time anymore. Any questions? I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
I'm just here, and I wanted to face another question of being clear. Here, for example, prisons do not have a remote access feature because lawyers are supposed to go to prison with an interpreter procured on their own and then use that interpreter or either remotely or in person, but through the attorney. Is that available there too, or anyone who goes to interact with a prisoner at the jail has to use this remote service?
Oh, thank you very much for the question. The remote service is completely optional. Prisoners don't necessarily always, especially when they're new, don't know that it's available. And of course, it's in a way difficult when you have to schedule a meeting, but the problem is there immediately in a way. So there's always this kind of time delay that is built in. So for any predictable meeting, in a sense, there is people either organize in-house interpreting. Thank you. Or they come up with they book something like they book the external, but this is also part of the ethnography, what we want to find out what they do actually do. I mean, what do they do when someone needs help? So the other element, what you're describing, is then I think when the lawyer is involved, could be potentially about the kind of the criminal proceedings. And then this is another element of it. So what we were looking at is more kind of the prison itself, the day-to-day stuff that goes on in prison. The other element would then be also in the UK covered more by kind of the prosecution service and the court. So, but there it's kind of most of the time there is either remote interpreting available or on site, but we didn't look into specifically into this.
So now that I'm clear on that, my question was, is this the big word, the provider, right? I'm assuming sort of like an equivalent of Language Line in the United States, just a private contractor that provides. So are they selected by bidding? Is there?
Yes, there's every 3 years there's a tender coming out from the Home Office, and it's usually Language Line or Big Word. And it's a
Language
local-
Line competes there too?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
And it's alternates usually. And then there's a third one, Clarion. Clarion usually does sign language, British Sign Language. So, but it kind of those three kind of divide the market, and sometimes it's that, and then it's the other one, and so.
Has your research lasted long enough to establish a difference between the
No.
opinion of the different contractors? Like, are people equally dissatisfied of Language Line or of the other?
It's no, actually, we didn't yet. So we started last year, and the Big Word has always been kind of around as long as we're around. So no, we haven't kind of seen another, and it's a relatively new feature for the prisons itself. So before Big Word, prisons didn't have this option. So this just came 2 years ago when Big Word got the last bid, basically, that it's more an add-on to the contract that the Home Office and that the Ministry of Justice in general has, and then it's just kind of they can ride along because it's assumed that there is not much work. I don't know.
Thank you.
Who else with questions?
Thank you so much for this enriching presentation. Just to make sure, so you mentioned the tender-based system, right? So does it mean that the services are paid by the state?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
paid by this. Yes, it is. It is. So they have a certain contract with the Big Word for the whole Ministry of Justice, a certain amount of money that the contract is worth, basically. What we've learned now, we also talked kind of in the beginning when we kind of established the context, we talked to the contract managers at the Ministry of Justice. So in each part of the Ministry of Justice, so you have the prosecution service, and like there are 7 or 8 different parts, and they all have a contract manager who kind of looks what Big Word is doing and how demand and supply kind of add up. And prisons is the only one where kind of demand seems to be very low. So everyone is kind of not happy with the service, but they don't use it, which is interesting.
That's a paradox, right?
Yes, it is. So,
Okay.
and this is also part of why we're kind of doing the qualitative now to find out, okay, what's kind of actually the problem here.
Okay, and so the objective of the research would be to to push the system to use the services of those platforms on a more regular basis?
Oh, no. I think the purpose of the purpose of the research, okay, there are many purposes actually. So it's also a bit of kind of the economy of how academia works. So we started this as a survey-based thing because we wanted to establish rapport with those people. So our plan is to do a large research grant project like in a year to better understand kind of what are the best strategies to kind of accommodate prisoners linguistically. So the first step and kind of was a measure to kind of just build a network was also the survey in a sense.
Okay.
And our own curiosity of trying to find out what's going on. And then it progresses now to the qualitative part. And after we have established kind of a bit of a knowledge base and know what's going on, then we can confidently kind of do the next step and make a larger project out of it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one final question. Do you think you might get to do sort of a bit of, as you go into the next stage of this research, a bit of more in-depth interviews of the interpreters themselves or sampling of the interpreters?
Hey, that's a good question. So for the in-depth stage so far, we are interviewing prisoners and staff, but not interpreters because the
Why not?
interpreters on the screen. Initially they're not there. It's not in the design so far. It's a great question. It should be in the larger project. It should be the more holistic approach. The thing with this research is also it's a huge kind of organizational hassle in a sense. So you go to various kind of approval processes, like not only ethics but also kind of the research design itself is scrutinized by. They have a committee that looks at those things, and you have a lot of patients where you really clearly like state your methodology and what you do when at which prison and so on. And we didn't yet figure out operational, like from an operational perspective, how to do this. Like if we have you on the screen and us there and the prison involved, and then after that, I don't.
So there's no way, obviously, that you could
There
get
is a way.
direct access to the interpreters.
Not direct, no. Not
Then it speaks to how much agency
of course.
interpreters have in terms of influencing what's going on.
Exactly. No, but there is we somehow need to include it. And also when you talk about agency, it's interesting because what the Ministry of Justice said when we kind of devised the plan for the qualitative part that we're doing now, and they said, hey, you gotta make sure from an ethics perspective that the big world knows what you're doing. That they are.
Wow.
They didn't say the thing about kind of the interpreters need to know what they do. Doesn't matter.
Wow.
That the big world needs to know that you're evaluating their services.
Thank you. That's great. That's a very, very good, very critical takeaway. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Merz. As we do the next panel, some logistical things. The coffee is here already, and we're kind of swapping the program a little bit. Go ahead, Danielle. So feel free, and we will have lunch after this, and the next speaker after lunch.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sebastian Muth. And we're going to have the faculty panel now, so you can please make your way up. We're going to have some of our faculty here from the MATI program, and the topic is Between Translation Studies and Professional Translation and Interpreting, a Relevance Debate, where the faculty of the MATI program will discuss whether the things being learned in schools, being taught to upcoming translators and interpreters is relevant with today's digital platform economy. Very important topic. And do we have everyone? Do we have everyone? Okay, perfect.
Um, to start, just from some speakers, there's a cancellation on the last speaker, Christine Despour. She's not able to make it. And also Natasha, it seems, from this group too, is not able to make it. But at any rate, I think we will have a lot. Is Natasha here? In case? Okay, no, okay. The topic that we have at hand here is really a series of questions, right? And it's premised on a distinction between translation studies, as we call it, right? The traditional field that is very much, I guess, rooted in academia, and what we call professional translation interpreting as the new rising field. And I think in most institutions, either they're kept apart discreetly, as in at CUNY we have the graduate. It's kind of at the Graduate Center, we do have some, I think, some level of translation studies under comparative literature in the various language-specific spaces. And in the meantime, here we have MARTI, which is a very new program. And the issues at hand, of course, are as the world more and more functions in multilingualism as pretty much a new normative. Translation studies within academia really operates in quite a different space where people have typically academic jobs, and it's a scholarly pursuit, and it is based on foreign language studies, as the basis. And as we go on, those of us who are in teaching positions, some of the issues we face are really are pivot around the question of relevance, right? Whether you could be you could start off with a passion in particular languages, and you're translating out of love, and you're translating, to be faithful to the source text, right? And then at the end of the day, you swing over to, it's sort of a whole pendulum extreme where you have Brian Messab, one of the sort of the rising stars apparently in the field of I think he's in French English translation, and he's published this translating and revising. No, what is it called? It's called editing and revising and translation, right? I make some of you read this in my course. And of course, his definition of a good translation is one that satisfies the client. All right, so we've come to this point where you're thinking, well, how do we assess translation, right? How do we assess the skills that are involved in interpreting, in the sort of impromptu, rapid fire coming, in your audio as audio input, right? the oral output, of the interpreter, and the sort of skills involved, right? It's so much involved, the immediacy of performance, right? And then you compare that to the comfort of working on great literature, and and then analyzing your translation against 10 other versions of translations. And to what end at the end of the day, right? And of course, if you have to be paid for it, then you probably wouldn't be doing it. And that's, and that really speaks to how, where we are at now. Okay. So, and with that, I was with, who am I supposed to start with according to the plan? Let me see. Sorry. That's right. We'll start with Niall, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit, and because I don't want to take up too much time talking. So Niall, introduce yourself, and of course, I think you introduce the languages that you work in, and start out with the rationality, of translation you do, and how that is reflected in the evolving paradigm of change, right, that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Yeah. So I'm Nael Hidjo. I have a PhD in Translation Studies from the University of Malaya, Malaysia. I'm a scholar member of the New University in Exile Consortium, the New School, and a former Mellon Fellow at Columbia University. I'm a freelance English into Arabic translator and interpreter, and that these are my working languages. It's English, and I'm a native of Arabic, which I do translate or interpret mainly into. So to begin with, the platform economy and the recent developments and changes in the field, when it comes to the pair of language I work with, English and Arabic, back in the Middle East, where Arabic is widely spoken, or it's the first language and the native language of hundreds of millions of the inhabitants or the people there, it's still underestimated, and it's still unrecognized, the status of translation I'm talking about, and even publication and writing. So academically speaking, not all universities have a translation program, and it's still the debate whether it's an art, and the old never-ending debate of whether translation is an art or as it's an academic field of study. So that affects the status, and that affects also the profession itself, or the industry of translation in the English-Arabic translations or business. So with the new developments, thanks to platform economy, we are seeing more of professional translators without a translation or an interpreting certificate or an academic training. So maybe that's what I would say at this point.
The trend?
Yes.
Do you have more to add?
Well, definitely, I have more to add.
How about more specifically? I think in informal conversations, we talked about that. Do you think the digital revolution, so to speak, right, and the way in which the platformatization, if you allow the coinage, of the business world now makes translation sort of a lot more automatized, of course, more accessible and kind of more banal. Do you think that contributes to low pay and therefore to, to sort of, this just a general sense in which that it is something that this, this is kind of just work that people would pick up?
I would say yes, in the context of, or in the sense that people believe and use more of machine translation and the AI translations than professional translators nowadays. Users or people in general have access to instant translations provided by machine and AI with or for no cost and at any time in the day. So nowadays we see this tendency towards digital and machine translations, and they believe, especially with the advances, we can't deny that they have advanced a lot, but still, but that affected the tendency and the belief more and more in these technologies, and the marginalization and devaluation of professional translators in real life. And definitely payment is one of those aspects that have been affected with this tendency. Since users or people don't have or don't speak the target language, the language of the translations, so they don't or they can't assess the translations, the quality of the translations, whether, and the machine translation and AI translation is sounds just fine to those users, and then to them, they don't have, if they can get instant translations from machine and AI, so why they have to pay for someone, for a professional translator who would take so much money and so much time. So this is one of the challenges that we are facing in the industry, as well as we have been discussing in academia. And this discussion leads us to the main discussion that I usually go to or talk about with my students inside the classrooms and even outside the classrooms. It's about the status of a translation itself. Still until today, even after 28 years since the publication of the notice, the translator's invisible or invisibility, the translator is still invisible, and the status of a translation is still not what we think or about or where it should be at. So I always emphasize in my classrooms to my students, when talking to my students or at some academic platform as this, on the importance of translation and translation studies. This is because as professional translators, we have to explain. It's not always the case that clients ask for explanations about some translation choices or decisions, but we need to be handy when asked about some explanations. That's why we have not only to have vocational skills, but also intellectual skills and enough knowledge about the many translation strategies and techniques that can be used and choices can be made, so to say, to explain to the clients. And that comes back to clients' satisfaction.
Right.
If we are talking.
So Brian is right.
In the sense that we can explain our translation decisions.
That's right.
Yes, because at the end of the day, we are doing this out of passion and to make a living. So yes, we need to satisfy the client and to achieve client satisfaction. But on academic basis, on the basis of those many schools of thoughts in the field of translation studies that we can explain and use in our profession.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Natasha. So you made it. Great. I can swing back to you then. Okay. So so Natasha, by way of introducing yourself, tell the audience in what direction you translate. I know you do Spanish and English, but generally or typically, which would be your more dominant directionality, right? And because this is a topic about relevance, relevance of academic training in the field, in professional practice. How much translation do you do for fun, if ever, or in your understanding, how much is translation done for fun, and how much to do, to earn a living? And if you could comment on whether or not these processes are different, the two processes, the monetary versus the non-monetary stream of translation. And if you try to integrate this question in your teaching at all.
Good morning, everybody. And I was invited to a conference at 11:15, so I think I was on time, but it was sad to see that you started earlier, but happy to be here. I brought something now because I could just talk about endlessly. So if you allow me, I'm going to read something briefly. I translate to dilute barriers, to get closer to beauty, to create another version of said beauty, to be a transport. My focus is literary translation, and I take a lot of the notion of refuge in my own existence. My first major translation is coming out this August with One World, which is an imprint of Penguin House, and it's a unique book of poems. The title is The Border Simulator, El Simulador de Fronteras, by American poet Gabriel Dosal. It will be published in both languages, English, which is the original, of course, and my translation into Spanish. Both languages facing each other in the book, having the spine of the object as a border. We could say that Dosal, the poet, my author, and myself work as customs agents. We had fun, and I was paid for this job that has been the closest reading I have done in my career. Translators, as you know, are the closest readers ever to exist. This amount of money was fair and respectful. And I like to remind that to my students that you can get paid and you can be in the front page and in the cover of the book as well. But is it true that I continue to work and collaborate with this translation? It's not a done deal yet until it's done and until it's published. Given the nature of a book published in both languages, and this being its first edition ever, entails a translation endeavor that doesn't stop in the text. There are actually TikTok videos that One World, the publishing house, want us to record. I don't even have a TikTok. Dosal in English and myself in Spanish. And this could be fun, no? And I was particularly happy about the invitation to record with my voice the audio version of this book. I love sound, no? And this is poetry. Poetry is sound and meaning, but I am a big defender of the sound in translation as well. In conversations with the author, he told me he was interested in my take, in my job, because of my attentive ear to sound and the eccentricities of contemporary poetry in both languages. Thank you. I can go on, but I'm going to stop.
Thank you. Oh, this is much better. Great, yeah, we'll pick up on that again, but this is a good, good time to switch over to Jen, who's an interpreter in the main. Jen, of course, you introduce yourself further, but I'll get right to my question. We talk about scholarly literary translators, right? And they tend to be text focused, of course, right? In translation, written translation is what we normally understand when we say translation, right? As translation. And many in that space may have actually, depending, of course, on the language pairing that you're in, but many in the space of literary translation, especially, may have next to zero speaking or listening abilities, and certainly cannot imagine interpreting bidirectionally, right? If you're in translation, and indeed the luxury of translating as a collaborator with the author, right? As opposed to the translating as a service. That's where you do have agency. So, given that, right, my question to you is that, by contrast, for those of us who are in professional translation interpreting, particularly interpreters, right? When you have a more kind of balanced, perhaps, command of both the source and the target languages, particularly, or you're more you have to be more accountable, right? In the language pairing, in both ways, in terms of accuracy, and all that. Do you think that, given the platform economy, between the two, which stream of practitioners is more likely to succeed, to thrive? I know I'm asking kind of a controversial question, please don't throw eggs at me. But I think it is a question that needs to be asked. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, this is a very expansive question. I'll try my best to tackle it, right, as best as I could. I'm an interpreter by training, and a verbal interpreter, and I have experience in translation as well, but my main focus is interpreter. But I think, it's a misconception that whenever we talk about translation interpretation, we tend to lump the two things together, right? We just assume that as long as you speak both languages, you can both interpret and translate. That's a huge misconception that we will need to educate. Maybe educate is a big word, but we need to communicate better our messaging, to the general public. Where I'm coming from, I was born in China. I was raised in China, and I went to college in China. And main difference, in terms of the translation interpretation industry between China and the US is that, pretty much in China, in all the universities, big or small, they always have a T&I program, regardless of whether the college is a science focused STEM college or liberal arts. So that's the first thing I noticed when I came to the US. There are only a few options out there, right? And then people tend to sort of misunderstand a lot of basic concepts, right? When it comes to bilingual, what is bilingual, what it means to be an interpreter on top of a bilingual person, right? And yeah, going back to your question, right? I'm gonna stop digressing. Going back to your question about literary interpreter and more like interpreter, I feel like I know it's a cliche the way I put it. We need both, right? You definitely need both. Funny that you mentioned that for some literary translators, they can barely speak the target language. Funny that I have a professor like that in my graduate school.
Oh, the source language.
Source language, sorry.
Translated.
Yes, source language. a translation professor of mine at my graduate school can barely speak a word of Chinese. However, he's so well known in the whole subset of Chinese literature translation. He's so well known. He's so well known. And then sometimes, I need to read his works to understand what the original Chinese texts mean. Because
Exactly. No, and nobody dares question that,
yes, I'm like, oh,
These days, you and I have to talk about the translation of brothers.
yes. Like I developed a deeper understanding of my native language Chinese by reading his English translation of some Chinese classics. I'm too embarrassed to admit that, but that's true. That's true. It's funny. He has such deep understanding of the ancient Chinese language form that I feel ashamed. I should have paid more attention to to the Chinese from 1,000 years ago. I did not. So now I'm catching up. And so going back to your question, right? For literature translators of that caliber, his role is way beyond, the traditional sense of a translator, right? Like you said, he's more like a collaborator with the author. But of course, in this case, the authors are long gone. They're like 1,000 years old. They're long gone.
They're the big ones.
They're still living among us. Through their works. Absolutely. So in that sense, we have a need. We have a need for sophisticated literary translators that can help us conduct more in-depth in terms of cultural communication between the two peoples, right? The English speaking people and the Chinese speaking people, right? Now going back to and with that in mind, I'm not intending to belittle what I do as an interpreter. It's just the intermediacy about the needs, right? I mean, for me, it's more about providing the immediate resistance, right, in the context of verbal communication. And so what I do, I mostly do conference interpreting, and so people have the immediate need to understand and correspond with each other. That's what I do, and I take pride in what I do, and but I can, but in terms of the work of a translator, I don't think I can do the work. And on the other hand, I don't think they can do my work, because it takes a lot of courage to stand in front of a room full of people and interpret in a language that's not native to you, so it takes a lot of courage. So I take pride in that. So all I'm saying is that, translators and interpreters are very complementary to each other in nature. And it's not a trade-off. It's not a binary game, so we need both.
You still haven't answered my question though, which is between the two streams, which one do you think would thrive or would succeed more in the current platform economy and the way language services are driven?
Oh, I have so much to say about the so-called platform, right? Economy, I think the other day I took a taxi. I took a Uber to a JFK, and then because I was in a rush, so I had to select the so-called rush service, and they charged me a $20 premium on top of my original fare, right? The original cab estimate. And then once I got into the cab, then I asked the cab driver, "Hey, buddy, so I pay $80 for this trip to JFK. And as opposed to, the $50 without the rush." I said, "How much did you pocket?" He said, "I pocket $20. So tip me well." I said, I will try my best." So my point is, so it's the so-called the platform, right? If the platform, the so-called platform, or what we call intermediaries are prosper, are booming at the expense of the interpreters, I think that would be a huge disservice to the whole industry, right? Because it means that people will not be incentivized to get into the sector, which is it's a shame, you know, because going back to that legal interpreter, you know, everybody is entitled to due service, due process. And part of that is that we are entitled to go through that legal process in our native language, right? However, if we keep squeezing the space, you know, of our interpreters in terms of pay, I know we should not keep talking about money, but that's the problem of it, right? We've got to make a living. So if, you know, we don't tackle that, you know, like, if I may digress a little bit, the healthcare industry, you know, I don't mean to brag. A few years ago, I bought a lot of ETF in the healthcare sector. Oh my, it did so well, you know, it did so well, you know, and within that portfolio was, you know, Aetna, United Healthcare. My point is, you know, intermediaries are reaping too much benefit from whatever sector they tend to get into, right? In the healthcare sector, it's supposed to be a bi-directional transaction, right? Between a patient and a doctor. It's a little bit controversial, right? But it turns out the middleman makes a lot of money, right? So it's a very difficult question, I think.
Fair enough, yeah. Yeah, and I think on the other side is, you know, the ability to get a book contract if you're a literary translator and perhaps minimize that kind of intermediary alienation that, you know, that the platform economy is subjecting us to, right, into the whole work process. So yeah, thank you, Jen. So Maristella, getting to you. Yeah, and I know most of your work is centered in the court system, right? And you also teach conference interpreting. And to bring the discussion back to the classroom, you know, the iconic image of the interpreter in the booth, you know, is what I think your work in teaching, you know, we're very fortunate to have you, by the way, in the program, all right, you know, giving students a sense of what that's like and how to handle that. But it is so, for most students, I think, you know, kind of being thrown in that imaginary, it's so far removed from the idea of the text, right? You know, the nice, comfortable sheets of paper and print, you know, that we grow up knowing, right? You know, from day one, it's what school is all about. And particularly, you know, especially we're given, you know, a nice chapter to, you know, to translate, you know, kind of wrap up snug in bed, right? You know, and do it in your own time. So how is translation, text translation relevant in the work of the interpreter? How is that relevant in the booth? And how do you deal with that in the classroom? You know, that question of relevance.
Thank you, Julie. Well, just to go straight to the point so that the rest of my ramblings will make sense. There's a lot of text in interpreting. There's side translation, the most evident, you know, relationship with the text is where in any context, healthcare, courts, conferences, you're handed a document and expected to render it in the target language flawlessly, naturally, idiomatically, with absolutely no time to prepare to do so, right? Sometimes not even time to read it through at least once before delivering it. There's also what's known as simultaneous with text, which happens a lot in the booth in conference interpreting, especially in places, venues where you have speakers with prepared remarks. Somebody will pop in the booth 2 minutes before start of show and hand you an entire speech and expect you to, according to them, they're doing you a favor, but turns out that's a prepared speech, right? Is that people don't speak like they write. And so translation is essential for the formation of an interpreter and for the rest of their life as an interpreter. If you cannot, I'm not a translator, but I do translation. It's part of my official duties in the courts the federal courts where I work, but it's also a needed training tool, essential training tool. And not only doing the translation, but understanding the theory behind it. I always try to give my students my take on what's like the pinnacle for me of the profession, right? And the pinnacle for me of the profession is a paradox. When you're interpreting at the highest level, people forget that you exist. Unfortunately, we're there to be forgotten. People are supposed to achieve a fictional state where they really, for a moment, suspend the knowledge that we exist, and they really think they're communicating between each other, or that speaker is speaking directly to them, and that I'm not there. Even if it's a man and my little girly voice is there interpreting for him, at some point that person forgets that it's me, and they enter into the fiction that it's them. And to achieve that, the whole give me a formula, what's the best way to translate the sentence, that doesn't work. You need a lot of study just to become that. And then you need to make up your mind, if I'm going to be a good interpreter, this is the rest of my life. Studying theories about stuff, reading books, reading the news, reading gossip websites, watching entertainment daily, watching soap operas, and looking at scientific, conferences in YouTube. Anything and everything that falls in your lap, you should read from beginning to end. Because that's the life of an interpreter, is a constant accumulation of knowledge to feed that, amazing software that we have implanted in our brain. It needs content, and we need to keep on giving it content, because as the young generation here present will know, it keeps changing at faster and faster speeds. And if you can't keep up, that's when you're done. That's when you get to that day to the conference, and a younger speaker hands you something, and there's some are like absolutely incomprehensible, way of expressing your thoughts. And I have my teenage children to kind of cover that for me. But if I didn't, I would be on YouTube listening to teenagers all the time speak, just so I could get the gist of what they mean when they speak, just as much as I need to understand the gist of a president or a minister when they speak at the UN. We need to have it all. And in order to have it all, if the foundation you lay to build, right, you're interpreting beautiful palace. If the foundations are crappy, if you don't have theory, if you haven't read enough, if you haven't studied both your languages or your A, B, and C languages extensively and deeply, if you don't go constantly back to the grammar, to the syntax, then that beautiful building is going to crumble. You're going to freeze in the booth, and your career will be over. Right. So for me, it's essential. My students know that I keep on hammering the point. I'm just giving you some basics. And from here on out, you have to commit yourself to become that interpreter. There's just so much we can do in the classroom, unfortunately. We can show them, we can give them a preview. And then after that, it's on you. Most of us from my generation, even today, we complain about the lack of programs. When I was becoming an interpreter, there was Middlebury, Arizona, and Europe. And I couldn't go to either. Yeah, none of those were available to me. I'm self-taught as an interpreter. That doesn't mean I didn't do my work. I didn't open those books. I ended up getting a PhD in literature, for God's sakes, just so I could be a better interpreter. I ended up teaching, yes, kind of through a different way. But to me, that it changed my life. All the studying English at some point, even though I'm bilingual, quote unquote, at some point I realized this isn't enough. I need to understand this language. So I went and got a bachelor's in English. Then I realized I don't even understand my own language this well. So then I went and studied Spanish. Ended up getting a PhD in Spanish. That's the life of an interpreter, not the PhD part, the part where you study as much as you would to get a PhD. Everything that you need to know is out there for you, but you need to go and grab it.
Thank you, Estelle. This is solidly grounding, right? Yes, you have a question already. Great.
And in Europe also we had this program, but you know, it's not everything. And there was another program in Paris, it was easy. So ESID was a public program, it was the one, and then there is ESID, the private Catholic Institute.
Right.
And in the Catholic Institute, a part of the program was management of translations, and I don't know if they had also for interpretation, but at least they had they added a section of how to work with translation services. And what happened is that the experienced translators from my school would end up working for younger graduates from the other program that had management. So my question to you would be, would you consider adding project management in translation to your program?
That is such, it's almost like, you and I actually put the script together for this presentation. Because in the second round, which is, we're going to open this to any of the speakers who want to chime in, but with myself starting off, right? And this has actually been on my mind, and I want to share it with everyone today. Yes.
And so I had to explain to them like what the interventions.
Right.
Very interesting. I had to explain, give my experience to the persons who were managing my work.
Exactly, yes. And that is the irony. And more we're seeing that and you're right, panelists, that is across all sectors. This thing that is, that we're talking about with people that are aligned and apprised with the evolution of technology, and it happens so fast that they actually tend to be more in control, and then indeed reaping the bulk of earnings in every sector of life nowadays. So anyway, coming back to what we're about here, right? With the rise of the platform economy, what we're seeing is that across the landscape of higher education and professional credentialing, such degrees as the MATI degree, along with others as well. There is actually with translation interpreting, you see a conscious recentering of the curriculum around technologies, right? And so, for example, with the MATI program, I felt like the first imperative for me, and I already done it, as my students will attest, is to introduce localization and terminology management, right? And that's one of our new courses from last year. It was not originally part of the program. And why? Because there is still, and back to the United States and how far behind we are compared to China, and maybe also Korea. I'd be interested to hear that, what's going on with MATI in Korea. But here we are in America. The few programs struggle with the tension between the older generation of academics. And I must say, I have the same issues here, right? The full disclosure, you have professors, who are experts and, given their lives to Spanish, to German, they have no idea what translation interpreting is about, although they may have translated a book or two, right? But the way we have to deliver translation today, right? And certainly they've not heard of localization. What is that? It's a new coinage once again. So and when this program was put into place, there was none of the awareness, or the sense of what sorts of students will be coming into this program. That says, in fact, the program is very much tied to the idea that students committed to Chinese language or to scholarship in Spanish or in Russian would just go on and become academics and teach Spanish and teach Russian, and that's what we have struggled with. Anyway, so I want this panel to also jump in here, right? So as we try to I'm thinking of realigning the program in terms of localization management, project management, right? Translation service management, delivery, right? So as we do this, specifically in your classroom, right, are you already sensing the interest and the need, to address challenges, for the real world handling of what it is like to navigate the platform economy, to navigate invoicing and, chasing after payments, and how do you get to the job? Sometimes by the time you respond, you already lost the job, right? If you're working for 2 or 3 platforms. So those questions, anyone, and if you could share the microphones freely.
I can go.
Who wants to go first?
I will. Go.
Okay, now.
So yes, last fall semester, as you know, I led a seminar on intercultural communication and translation presented by the New School. Since it was online, it was open to the public. So I had the students from all over the world, from the Global South and the Global North as well. And I could notice the tendency towards students asking such questions about those kind of challenges, how to navigate digital platforms and the translation industry in this digital age. But what I can say that I also noticed that it's completely different from a market to another, and that's why I would suggest you may have a localization or project management course added into your MATI program. But as an addition, it's not the focus. Like, we have to keep teaching the foundations, the many schools of thought in translation studies, because those are the foundations, but to add on localization and project management. But as I was saying, we need to keep in mind that it's completely different from one market to another. To say, in China's market of translation and interpreting, it's completely different from what you will find or what translators and the students need in the United States. The case also, the same case in the Middle East or Asia, to say Malaysia. So it's completely different. I learned from my discussions from the discussions with my students that they have unique and different needs in different parts of the world. So we have to keep that in mind when implementing and adding such courses. But definitely they would add and they would be beneficial to the students.
Thank you. Maristela?
Just my 2 cents, actually. My first job in New York, I started in Texas as an interpreter in the United States. And when I moved to New York, my first job was in a translation agency and I was a project manager. And it was a formative experience to be a project manager. It was also the kind of experience that left me thinking I never want to be a project manager again. From the point of view of, it's different being a project manager when that's all you are, from being a professional linguist and then being a project manager, because then there's the whole I'm helping to exploit my fellow interpreters and translation professionals by doing this, which is, I'm just putting it out there because it's easy to say, oh yes, I'm going to study this. And then if I get that job at the translation agency, brace yourself, because that's half of the job of a project manager is convince language providers to cheapen their rates and to then deliver high quality work for the money that should be paid for low quality work or machine translation. There's also the problem, yes, in the new platform economy of the availability, not only of machine translation, now AI supposed interpreting, which is another completely different subject. And I put it out there too, because I think the classes are essential because people need to know about this. People need to understand the practices behind the industry. And they are just like behind any industry, they're corporate predatory practices where the actual people who do the work are the ones that earn the less benefits, right? I had to do a lot of quote unquote quality control, editing, reviewing, a lot of localization. And the experience was most of the providers were excellent providers who we were shortchanging. There was really not that much quality control for me to do. There was not really that much localization for me to do. There was really good people, but because they lived in South America, they were willing to take money that no translator here would ever work for. And that's the new reality. The platform economy has put us, especially the translators, interpreters are still holding on because, in part because it is so region specific. What you need from interpreters is really depending on where those interpreters live. And also because despite the best efforts of those working on them, AI interpreting is no Google Translate, okay? Google Translate is much, much better than any attempt that has been done so far to interpret, like make a machine interpret. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, it will happen. I always tell my student at some point, a machine is going to do our job. Not yet. So because not yet, is that we need to understand the industry as much as we understand everything else. I know how to invoice, I know how to deal with clients because I was a project manager, not because of my experience as an interpreter. So having that and even maybe working a couple of months in a translation agency, very formative experience.
Thank you, Estela. Over there.
Well, I think I'm starting to reflect constantly about these tools that are becoming more sophisticated and as sophisticated as scary over there. In the field of literary translation, I think the translator will become a curator, and will define what is out there, and the platform economy is not going to stop. As I tell my students just learning Spanish, we negotiate with power, and we will negotiate with the tools that are there, maybe to make our works easy, maybe they are going to make our decision taking complicated, but that's where we have to become better in sharper decisions and curators of everything that is there, what the artificial intelligence is producing, then we will become the judge if this is the right thing for the right object or text. So that's it. Define or search, like whatever is there, we're in a museum and we have to put that together. Thank you.
I totally agree with my fellow panelists about the emergence of, let's say, AI translation and machine translation is having a major impact on industry, right? And I also agree that at this point, human are still indispensable at this point, right? For translation. And I feel like even in the future, when machine translation gets so good, it will still require input, of human to keep the machine, to keep, the translation, to keep it improve, to keep it improving. And yeah, in this sense, translators are in a more precarious situation than interpreters, because as my fellow panelists mentioned earlier, regardless of where the agency is located, anywhere in the world. You know, you have access to translators all over the world, regardless of where. And because of the platform, because of technology, you can work with people remotely. And so for translator, you really need to differentiate yourself with your work output. Very important, you know, you got to make yourself indispensable. You know, you gotta add a lot of personal flavor, touch to your work to make yourself really stand out. Like the professor I mentioned earlier, you can pay me $1 million. I cannot replicate his work. To be honest, I cannot replicate his work in terms of interpretation, right? The platform economy. I would say during the pandemic, you know, pretty much 100% of the works were conducted online, and I got to work with interpreters located in China, located in Southeast Asia, and that's the inevitable trend. You know, there's nothing we can do to reverse that. But in my naive, you know, mindset, in my naive mind, I always believe that people are longing for the touchy feeling, that you want to see the person in action in real life, you know, instead of when I have the option to really interact with people in person, I prefer that, right? To you know, remote interpreting. So that's working to our advantage. And not to mention the local expertise that local interpreters can bring to the table. So in that sense, interpreters, on one hand, we gotta keep honing our skills. At the same time, you know, we gotta do it the same way as translators. We gotta make ourselves stand out. You know, we gotta, you know, try to make ourselves indispensable with our work output. At the end of the day, it's your work that speaks for you, you know? And yeah, that's the cruel reality of the sector. Yeah.
How do you, and maybe for Jen or the rest of you to pick up on this, maybe as by way of wrapping up, if you have any specific instance, if you could recall any moment, any teaching moment in the classroom where you find that, hey, here's a moment where I need to adapt, I need to do something different from what I had done, you know, compared to what I'd done in the last 5 or 6 times that I've taught this class, or in the last 5 or 6 years. Here's a moment where, you know, really we have to, you know, do something that is much more in the forefront of the needs of the post-COVID, the post-pandemic world, and the, you know, the reality of the looming platforms and, you know, and the dominance of technologies. So if anyone would like to kind of come up with something like that for the students' sake.
If I may. As I was talking to you before the session, I've realized that I really would like to incorporate a lot more of, for example, practice using the Zoom simultaneous feature, just because that's what we use here for remote, right? Zoom, or any of the simultaneous features that are now available. I haven't tried them all, but I think it's an important experience. I did a lot of court work and also conference work during the pandemic using Zoom simultaneous. And if you get the handle on it, it's actually a nice experience to work with it. But there's implications to working in team, for example, doing team interpreting in a platform setting, right? Your booth partner is not in the booth, and that's already a problem for us who are used to. I don't know, I'm very interactive with my booth partners, and we collaborate a lot and support each other. And when you lose that is a problem. You lose also a lot more visibility. If you were already invisible, well, welcome to absolute obliteration of your personality. And because everybody really honestly just doesn't know you're there anymore, people will forget, for example, that if you're alone, you need breaks and you can't continue interpreting for an hour and a half, 2 hours without a break. Or they'll forget to give the connection to your booth partner and they can't take over to give you a break. All those things seem little, but they're essential. If you're gonna start working with these platforms, you really need to get a handle on troubleshooting, on how to communicate, what are my options to communicating with the people who are moderating these events, et cetera, et cetera.
Well-
You have time for a couple more comments? Yeah.
I'm still teaching online, so I can't answer this question.
Okay. Anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like going back to my fellow panelists' point. At this age, it's very important to develop some kind of technology literacy, right? In terms of how to use a platform. You know, during the past 2 years of pandemic, right? The most traumatic nightmare for me was when my partner forgot to mute himself or forgot to, yeah. I mean, it happens very often, you know, it happens often. And so at that point, I was like, I don't care about your production, you know, just make sure that the whole process goes smoothly. That's the bare minimum. You know, let's make sure that we don't hear you we don't hear you going to the bathroom, you know. So very important, right? That's the world we gotta adapt. We gotta adapt to. But of course, when you're doing it in person in a booth, sometimes you also accidentally leave the mic on as well. That happens, but when that happens, at least you got your partner to watch out for you, you know. So in a remote setting, you're on your own. So you gotta cover all the bases and yeah, technology literacy. Yeah.
Questions? Maybe we have time for 5 minutes.
So just a general comment, thank you all for your presentation. It was great. I am curious, just as someone who's learning about the industry and learning about translating and interpreting, if there's maybe a method that any of you follow, like, okay, Monday, I make sure that I read a scientific journal in both languages. Tuesday, I'm gonna look at what's happening in the political sphere. Like Wednesday, I'm going to look at this maybe type of thing. Is there like a process or something that you do to make sure that you're as up to date in both of your languages in as broad a capacity as possible?
I think we're talking about a discipline, a regime that we follow. Let's see which of us
Well-
here.
Well, we in the city of New York spend so much time on the subway. So I would say, like, I personally don't allocate specific types of text or books and topics to certain days. I just, like, whenever I'm on the subway, I get my phone, I look at the news, I look at translation news or updates, I look at this, I look at that, whatever comes my way on my phone. So that's what I do, and definitely that's for development, personal development. And as I discussed earlier, that we still need to go to the basics, to the academic, formal academic training and education. But then as a person who wants to stand out, as a translator who wants to stand out, you can, whatever comes your way, just read it, dive in, have a domain knowledge, especially if you are going to be a specialized translator, like in a medical field or legal field. So that's what I do personally, and what I would encourage you, in addition to joining professional associations such as the ATA, and attending their workshops and presentations and conferences.
Well,
I can add something to that.
Sorry, you want to add? Go ahead.
Just real quick, like my take on developing routines is don't develop routines. I'm saying this, and I know I'm a professor, and I apologize, I shouldn't be saying this, but it has been, I'm obsessed with neuroscience. My research in grad school was around literature and neuroscience. And one of the latest discoveries in the learning field is that variety is the key.
Yes.
routines, studying in the same place, studying in silence. No. Go out, live in the world. Oh, I have this translation theory book that I hate reading. Go into the world and read it there. Go to the park, or go to Starbucks. Have really delicious coffee while you read it. Like try to enrich your learning experiences and your professional betterment experiences with variety in as many different places as possible, hopefully with a lot of noise around you and interruptions, because your brain has to become flexible, and it won't become flexible if you get it used to Monday is science, Tuesday is politics. You need to just go with the flow. There's so many news feeds right now, and in spite of cookies, exactly. In spite of the fact that they give us what they think we want, we can still look for variety, and find your quote unquote routine there. Yes, keep on improving, but don't submit yourself to the boredom and the obligation of establishing a supposed system.
Because right at the end of the day, I want to add to this too, because at the end of the day, it's juxtaposition. That is part of this, the strategy. It's about coding and encoding and decoding, right? Moment to moment change. So, that is a neuroscience basis to this, that you got to train your mind to do that. One of the things I do try to do, but, not as a routine, but as and when, I drive, right? And I no longer, Jen, I have to admit, I no longer do that for Mandarin because I've given up. I don't expect to compete in the Mandarin market, but I still do for Cantonese. I would listen to the Cantonese radio, and practice, because it's a good challenge, right? Because, you have all the stimulus of having to be a responsible driver, watching the lights and everything. But then at the same time, you're interpreting and you kind of, so.
Yeah, I would say I may add, right? So I don't have a structured regimen like that. So pretty much you want to get well versed with pretty much all the subject matters, right? But of course you want to develop your niche, and your niche tends to be something that you are passionate about, that you really love. For some people it could be movie, could be music, could be art. You'll be surprised, the interpretation need for art in the art market. I mean, whenever I got offered jobs like that, I feel kind of, I have an inferiority complex. I can't take it. I don't know how to do it, and so you'll be amazed, how many opportunities would present themselves, if you follow your passion. But of course, you gotta know some basics about all the topics, finance, economics, right? And I'm sure by this point you can tell, I love finance and economics. That's something I read on a regular basis, and also love science. And I have a hard time with religious topics and art topics. So that's me. And so just follow your heart, and then try to be comprehensive, but at the same time develop your edge. And also, if you, as a simultaneous interpreter, it's all about, rewiring your brain so that you can multitask. You can listen while you speak. I think that's the most important thing you want to train yourself on.
Can I share something?
Sure.
I want to share something regarding the literary translation. If you are translating a poem or a piece or a book of certain period, try to find other authors of the period, that something, try to go and find a live webcam of a place that is describing the place. And it might be quiet, you can leave it on mute, but you are seeing how the air moves, how the lights arrive to the place, and it will tell you something. Also, take care of your mental health, because we are already surrounded by so much information. And I understand Kelly's question is an amazing question. How do you keep up with so many subjects in both or your three languages? And just also cultivate silence. You need the silence to your neutral space. And also the last thing I wanted to share, besides all these tools that you can surround yourself by seasons, if I have a project of this book that was like a video game simulation, I started playing video games and I started seeing what kids say about video games, how is their communication, their vocabulary. You become a character as well. And also is who are you? Because you have mentioned that you become indispensable. As a literary translator, you also have a voice. And as you progress in your portfolio and the works you have translated, you edify or you build that voice, which also you can build a sort of a statement. This is the translator that I am. I take care of sound. No, I respect absolutely the original. You take the angles, but you build as well and you cultivate that voice that will give you authors and clients in the future.
Thank you. I think we should wrap up. Oh, yes, we have one more. Okay, one more question, and then we're for lunch. Go ahead.
So I think visible is lovely. We aim to be visible, right? Quantification. I also really like the idea that being a bilingual, trilingual, not necessarily in that I think that would be a challenge to translate and other people use it.
Right.
Like, well, you speak Russian, you speak French, so you can understand, you can translate. No. Children strategy skills to be hard. We have to adapt to so thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Laura.
This is really a question about like I think this so much. So we have this is like this thing forever like this and everywhere that as Mariceli said, the system or the platform is about how to squeeze as much quality work out of you for the least amount of money. That's always been the trend. With machine translation and everything, they found kind of a way. Do you think unions or translators associations would change this? Is there a way to fight this? Can we change that? Any idea?
Well, I don't think so. Even at ETA, I think we are not supposed to discuss certain aspects of the profession itself. But I think we maybe individually or commonly have to, can develop a certain strategy to deal with these challenges. There's no an easy solution to overcome the platform economy and the tendency of translation agencies to squeeze the best of us for the least money, especially now with platform economy that opens the competition globally. So and being or living in the global north and here in the United States, especially in New York City, one of the most expensive cities in the world, we are not at best advantage in this equation because like more or less the same equality can be achieved or provided by some translators in the global south. Say I speak for Arabic language from the Middle East, which is way cheaper living wise than the United States and the city of New York. But we can develop individually, maybe, or we can discuss sharing solutions, but associations like ETA and even in academia, we can't intervene in this process to say.
I think I can add to that. I think first of all, that on the negative side, right? So just let me first give you the bitter pill. The bitter pill is this: not just that ATA is not likely, but that in fact, on the contrary, right? Make no mistake, ATA is not a union model organization, but rather, right? On the contrary, ATA is specifically a model, a model of conference organization, right? It actually feeds on the revenue of membership secondarily and primarily on corporate companies subscribing to the ATA as a platform for actually recruiting translators and interpreters on the one hand, but now more and more in light of the platform economy, in light of technologization, more and more actually feeding on the market of translators and interpreters who would purchase technologies. So, as years go by, those of you who engage in the ATA scene, you would, more and more notice that what actually the main revenue stream that comes from for ATA are these companies like Trados. Yes, exactly. Yeah, you have all of the CAT tool companies. You have, what is that? The SDL, right? Anyway, and of course, and the language companies. All right, a lot of the so-called LSPs. So you learn all about that, Laura. In certainly, if nowhere else, in the professional translators workshop that I teach. On the flip side, to end on a positive note, it is wonderful that you, as an emergent translator, that you're thinking in terms of unionization. And indeed, we're seeing, this country is seeing finally some revival and resurgence, of that spirit. And why not? Right? Years down the line, I see Jen looking at me cynically, like, what? She's like,
Interpreter.
but honestly, here it is, right? In the literature, you'd see too that we are more and more there are a lot of young professionals that are thinking in terms of a profession, a community of practice. And what does that mean, right? It is about professionals looking out for one another and building credence yourselves, from the ground up. Right. And so, instead of our going for, what is already organized for you out there and, trying to kind of play the corporate game. And then there's, a sense in which you got to kind of put your foot down and say, we're not playing this game. Right. We're going to advocate for ourselves. So, yes, it has to come from practitioners. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have work to do, And there's certainly more of such events as this, right? Where we bring our, put our brains and, bring ourselves together. Yeah. Okay, let's break for lunch. You have one more?
I said about having project managers, and when we have project managers that are conscious of the conditions needed by our colleagues, that this will benefit everybody. Whereas we have a lot of project managers that are just
Administrators. Yes, exactly. And I think this is to Mary Stella's point, right? That if you're a project manager, that you actually own the craft that is translation interpreting, that is a world of difference. And we need people like that. And yeah, we need some of you, to go for that. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Right. So exactly. Totally. Okay. Thank you. So we break for lunch.
Time for me to leave. Unfortunately, I have that. I'm training interpreters this afternoon.
You could ask them to join. I like training.
Really enjoy. That would be actually also. I would have had time. I'm
Great.
actually teaching.
Your work is really amazing. You have a book that's gonna get published.
Sorry?
You have two works that are gonna get published.
One.
One.
It's my first major.
So
Yeah,
amazing.
Spanish, I'm super
My God, it's so amazing.
happy.
I can't imagine.
It's a lot of, I'm not scared because it's gonna be with original.
Sorry, I have to dash.
Hi.
Training.
See you in person.
No,
Oh, you have a class in the afternoon?
I actually found you on our list and I was like, why? Couldn't you cover it? And so now that I know, I kind of put like asterisks by your name.
Yeah.
So when I see your name.
I was about to email you
Yeah,
after today.
especially now that you're in Long Island, our house in Central is famous to somebody wants to go there. 'Cause
Oh, yeah.
So interpreters in Long Island are like.
Oh, I would love to do that.
So I assume